Allison King, President of the League of Women Voters of Cortland County. Welcome. We're glad to see such a good turnout today. The League is a nonpartisan organization that encourages informed voter participation. So today we are here to listen to the views of two candidates for the September 12th primary election for Cortland County Judge. We have, in alphabetical order, David Alexander and Keith Dayton. They are both running on the Republican, Conservative, Independence, and Reform Party lines. This is a good time to remind people to mute their cell phones, please. So the format today, we will start with opening statements, 2 minutes each. And then we will move to a set of questions that were developed in advance by the League of Women Voters. During this time, please feel free to write your questions on the 3x5 cards. Volunteers will pick them up. They will be sorted to my right here. In the sorting, we have bipartisan sorters, and the aim is to eliminate questions that are not germane to the office, to group similar, duplicate questions, because we almost never can get through all the audience's questions. So again, the time limit for both the League's questions and audience questions is 1 minute. We only accept written questions. Campaign materials are not allowed here, though they can be distributed outside. And the League of Women Voters is the official video recorder. We ask people not to record. We are concerned that only an unabridged video recording will be available. I think by now it probably goes without saying, but we ask you all to promote civil discourse in your questions and of course in the responses as well. And both candidates have signed our guidelines before participation. So we are starting with the opening statements, and Mr. Dayton will be the first speaker.
Thank you. Thank you, League of Women Voters. It's horrible. It's an epidemic for sure. Unfortunately, those are recent headlines in the Cortland Standard, and they're talking about Cortland. Cortland is at a very crisis stage in our history right now. We're known nationally for our meth numbers. We have massive jail overcrowding and increasing numbers when the national trend and the state trend is going down. We have rampant mental health issues, severe mental health issues in our jail. We have a surge in homicides, more homicides in the last 5 years than the last 50 years. Unfortunately, that's where Cortland is at this point in time. That's what we know about. We can also expect gangs infiltrating Cortland. Synthetic heroin is making its way this way. Don't be surprised if we even see human sex trafficking entering the Cortland realm. That's why it's important that we have a county judge that's able to handle and deal with these very serious issues. I've spent 70,000 hours of my entire career dealing with these issues, 22,000 cases, dozens of felony trials, appeals, teaching. Unfortunately, my opponent in county court in the last 17 years has had 0 cases in felony court, 0 trials, 0 appeals. As an attorney, he wouldn't be qualified to even be assigned a serious felony case. We need experience in that position. Please vote for Keith, Cortland County Judge. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Alexander.
Well, you've heard plenty of reasons not to vote for me. Let me give you a few reasons to vote for me. Good morning. I thank the League of Women Voters and the Voter Services Committee for the invitation to speak this morning. Thank you also members of the community for being here. My name is David Alexander and I am running for Cortland County Judge. I'm an attorney with 20 years experience, and the practice background in areas of criminal defense, family law, and probate law. For the past 4 years, I have served as the Cortlandville Town Justice. I hope to succeed Judge William Ames, who will retire at the end of this year after serving honorably for 19 years on the bench. Now, the duties of a county court judge are as follows. 70% of what a county court judge does is spent in family court. That's the court in which I practice every day and for the last 20 years, representing children in custody, visitation, neglect, paternity, support, persons in need of supervision, juvenile delinquency. As an attorney for children, I hear all 6 sides to every story. As a town justice, I exercise preliminary felony jurisdiction over over criminal court and its family court as well. These are cases involving domestic violence in which I do issue orders of protection. 20% of a county court judge's time is spent on criminal court matters. As a town justice, I'm on call 24 hours a day. All serious crimes that arise within the town of Cortlandville will come before me for review, arraignment, and decisions on bail status. As a town justice, I've heard it all. Warrant applications for crimes in progress, arraignments on bank robberies, meth labs, burglary, arsons, grand larceny, violent felonies, DWIs, traffic fatalities. The remaining 10% is spent of a county court judge's time in surrogates courts. That's adoptions and probating wills and estates. These are the 3 courts in which I appear on a regular basis, on an almost daily basis. And it's the experience that's prepared me to seek election to the office of Cortland County Judge. Thank you.
Thank you both. Now the responses will be limited to 1 minute. So first question. According to our sheriff, the county jail is too small to safely house all Cortland inmates awaiting trial or serving a jail sentence. What steps should be taken to resolve this overcrowding? Should the county judges play a role in this decision? We'll start with Mr. Alexander.
As a sitting judge and as a judicial candidate, it's improper for me to weigh in on legislative matters. As a town judge, I thank God that there is a jail. I bend over backwards in order on the initial arraignments not to put people in jail unnecessarily. I can't punish them. I can't protect the community. All I can do is say, what's the severity of the crime? How likely is this person to come back from jail? And I take recommendations from the district attorney's office and the probation department and protect the rights of both the individual who's being arraigned and try to protect the community as well. But as long as they're coming back to court, I don't have to put them in jail immediately. So I'm done. Thank you.
Mr. Dayton. And if either of you would like me to repeat a question, let me know.
Sure. Thank you. Now, it is true that a judge cannot make his or her decisions just on accommodating a particular jail, but an awful lot a judge does has an impact on the jail. I've seen it, thousands of cases. In fact, one of the things that I see is that there's an efficiency that can be improved in the jail. Those that are in the system, rather than waiting a year to get through the system, I can get us down to 4 months. 4 months of getting things processed through the system. Secondly, in our jail we have rampant mental health issues, right? I would propose and volunteer as a county judge to run a mental health court, which would allow us not to have unaddressed mental health issues in the jail, but actually get them in a mental health court system. I believe in electronic monitoring, weekend jail, judicial diversion programs. I believe in prison rehab programs and shock camp programs as well. I would use all of those resources to improve justice, and if that has an impact on the jail, then so be it.
Next questions, which will start with Mr. Dayton. Have you seen cases of racial bias in the Cortland criminal or family courts? How have you responded?
Well, my chief position that I currently attend now is as Chief Public Defender of Cortland County. So having represented most of the criminal cases through our system in the last 15 years, I have seen everything. And including situations where there has been racial bias or discrimination. And in those cases, particularly if civil rights were violated, I fight for those civil rights. And I fight for judges to accommodate those. And as a judge, my job, and first and foremost, is to uphold the Constitution of the United States, which includes the Bill of Rights, and I would vigorously do that.
Mr. Alexander.
Thank you. Years ago, as an assistant public defender, many years ago, I saw a man, African American, the only African American I've ever seen, served time in jail based on a minor traffic incident, and that was here in Cortland County. He was an Army veteran. I was asked immediately by the town justice to represent him, and I immediately volunteered to do so. I was able to secure his freedom, and but I have to tell you, since that time, everybody who comes before me is treated according to the law. I can't tell you that I've seen issues of racial bias in my court. I can't tell you that I've seen issues of racial bias before either of our family court judges in any instance whatsoever.
This one, we've done that, okay. The next question, and this will start with Mr. Alexander. Do you think the courts adequately serve juveniles? What changes will raise the age bring, and how will the changes be implemented here?
Would you just repeat that, please?
Do you think the courts adequately serve juveniles? What changes will raise the age bring, and how will they be implemented here?
Well, for over 20 years, I've appeared on an almost daily basis representing children, primarily in family court. Raising the age is going to, in my instance, because we treat juvenile offenders in Cortlandville Court as with some degree of delicacy. I don't believe that as a county court judge there would be much difference in my approach, since I have been representing children as their attorney, and I intend to continue that because they are the most vulnerable members of our community.
Mr. Dayton.
Yep. Could I have the question?
Do you think the courts adequately serve juveniles? What changes will raise the age bring, and how will they be implemented here?
Right. So there's really two parts to that question. The first is, do the courts adequately address juveniles? And I suggest that we have a lot of improvement necessary in our court system to deal with our juveniles. That when I represent juveniles and I see that they are sitting in jail rather than being able to attend school, attend GED classes, or go to college if they're of that age, I think there must be a different alternative that's available. Community service, counseling, job training, something of that sort could be used instead of just jailing our youth. As far as the raise the age issue, mainly the county court judge will change a hat from criminal to family court, and I would use that same sensitivity that I would approach in the case of a juvenile charged with a crime in the family court system.
Thank you. The next question will begin with Mr. Dayton. How will you make Cortland County Court more efficient? How does your track record show you can make these changes?
Right, the efficiency of the county court system is definitely a top priority of mine. I see the inefficiencies and I see the outcomes of the inefficiencies resulting in increasing time in jail, increasing time before those in need substance abuse or mental health counseling before they get them, before we get someone that is interested in getting into the military, before we get someone into school or GED classes. I have a full plan, and I see I have 30 seconds to address this efficiency. First and foremost, this is the deal. Having handled thousands of cases, right? I can look at a case, I can say, let's get this case through the system and enforce that. And if that is enforced, then we can improve the efficiency. And I'm out of time, but I have a full hour to 2 hour plan on that I could address if anyone wants to ask.
Mr. Alexander.
There are certainly inefficiencies in the court system, but it is created by the needs of the judge to review each and every case and the facts and circumstances of each and every case individually, according to the law, according to the requests by the defense attorneys, according to the requests by the prosecuting attorneys. Yes, there are inefficiencies, but until we either get more judges or we are able to devote more time rather than 9 to 5 to our justice system, there is going to be that issue. Again, there's no rushing justice. You do have to treat every case individually, and folks, that really takes time.
So we have a number of questions from the audience that also relate to alternatives to incarceration. So I'm going to combine the legal question with some of those. This is a two-part question. We hear that the counties maxed out the number of people in alternatives to incarceration, yet the county's willing to spend $40 million to build a jail. Why couldn't those funds be used for alternatives? We'll start with Mr. Alexander.
I continually have to apologize because judges cannot weigh in on legislative matters. Alternatives to incarceration is a valuable service. We rely on them very heavily, and under their supervision, we are allowed and permitted and fortunate enough to be able to release people on their own recognizance, as long as those folks check in. You know, it becomes unfortunate if they simply do not have the mental awareness or they are suffering from addiction, not to be able to follow through with their promises in order to continue their freedom. But again, it's a legislative matter, folks. I wish I could tell you what I think privately, but I have to abide by, as every judicial candidate should, with the ethics requirements of the Judicial Ethics Committee.
Mr. Dayton.
Yeah, it's not my position to dictate whether the legislature invests more funds in any particular resources, but I will talk about alternatives to incarceration. I believe in alternatives to incarceration, right? I believe in the use of ankle bracelets and electronic home monitoring when it's appropriate. I believe in community service as a way of getting people on the right track. I believe in prison programs, rehabilitation prison programs, shock camp prison programs. I believe in using interim probation so that you can try out probation and see if someone's going to, take advantage of that. I believe in weekend jail if someone is working. I saw it's a case-by-case situation, and the judge has plenty of alternatives. And Mr. Alexander is going to talk about his, judicial experience. Let's have him explain how many people he's put on ankle bracelets, how many people he's put on interim probation to try it out, and how many times he's given weekend jail when that question comes up.
So, related to the same topic, the audience is asking, what are you doing? We've heard ideas. We hear that the problem is judges' sentencing practices, that judges are jailing too many people. So please discuss your own experience, your track record, your sentencing practices, or what you've done in your legal career that will help people understand what you would do as a Cortland County judge. And this time we will start with Mr. Dayton.
Sure, I've studied this problem at great length because I'm always making sentencing recommendations as I represent my clients. First and foremost, we have a major drug problem in Cortland. I'm an original member of the drug treatment court team. I went across the nation to learn the best practices for our drug court. I believe we should have that. I believe we should have a meth court, a mental health court. All of those things for those people that we are able to identify could benefit from such a program because they will be back in our community. I'm in strong favor of those types of programs. In terms of sentencing, you will look at the situation and you will assess what is best for this person to make amends to society, make a victim whole, keep our community safe, and with the idea and knowledge that this person is going to end up back in our community, so we have to address that as well. Thank you.
Mr. Alexander.
Repeat the question, please.
I did ad-lib a bit there. We also hear that the problem is judges sentencing, that judges are jailing too many people. So please discuss your own practices, what you've done, and how that information will help us understand what you would do as Cortland County Judge.
Sure, thank you. I believe in an incremental approach to sanctions. If, for instance, if there happens to be a fine, I tend to go with a lower fine. If I see a repeat offender, the fine goes up. Same thing with jail. If I can bend over backwards and allow that person a chance at rehabilitation by attending mental health, by going to drug rehabilitation, giving them any chance that they can to avoid imprisonment, I'm happy to do that. We also rely very heavily on the recommendations by Alternatives to Incarceration and the Probation Department, because those are the folks that really have to abide by or supervise their interim. But you know, just as when I was a dairy farmer, you know, you've got people that are wired, you've got cattle that are wired certain ways. They're not going to change. We try to give the good folks who've done something bad a chance to rehabilitate themselves. We sometimes have to put the bad folks away for a long, long time.
Now we're shifting to questions from the audience, and just put up your hand if you have a question you'd like somebody to collect. And our collectors, please bring them over to the table for sorting. So this next question, and if a question is targeted to one of the two candidates, I will broaden it so it applies to both. So this next question relates to experience. What's the difference between your current position or prior legal experience and what a Cortland County judge does? And please start with explaining what your current position is. And what people, I think, want to understand is how does your experience qualify you to take on whatever are the different responsibilities of a county judge. So starting with Mr. Alexander.
Well, thank you. As I discussed in my opening statement, a county court judge handles 70% of his time or her time in family court. That's the court that I've practiced in every day for the last 20 years. Also, 20% actually a minimal amount of time in criminal court. And as Cortlandville Town Justice for the past 4 years, that is something that I've got a greater amount of experience. I'm probably, the other matter is, of course, surrogates court. I'm probably the only attorney that practices in all three courts: family court, criminal court, and surrogates court on a regular basis. I think I answered.
Mr. Dayton.
Thank you. Before I answer that question, I want to say that my position as a judge is I treat people as people. They're not cattle, they're people. Secondly, in my position as public defender, I take great pains and take great responsibility, and my job's not putting criminals on the street as public defender. My job is to help people take responsibility for themselves, counsel people to accept that responsibility, make their victims whole, make amends to society, get back on the right track. In family court, convincing our clients, do what's right for the children. And that if that is achieved and you accomplish those things, then what happens is that person is better off, their family's better off, and our community is better off. So that's the approach I take as public defender. The difference between public defender and judge is, as public defender, I can just kind of try to ask them and persuade them to do that. As judge, I will do those exact same approaches, except I'll have a little bit more power to try to compel that. Same approach. Thank you.
Again, on the topic of experience, one question relates to whether someone has represented parents, whether you've represented parents in family court. Again, I'm going to broaden that and ask you to talk about, in your legal career, what are the different groups that you've represented? And I know it's a short time frame, but to the extent that you can help us understand, are there different approaches as you represent parents or children or other criminal people accused of criminal matters? So in this one, we will start with Mr. D.
Thank you. In family court, my experience includes I represent parents in abuse and neglect cases, including fair hearings for indicated reports. I have extensive experience representing parents in custody, grandparents in custody, visitations, victims of domestic violence. I've worked with the Integrated Domestic Violence Court. I represent parents on support violations, support determinations, divorces. I've been attorney for the children, and also known as law guardian work. I've handled paternity matters, juvenile delinquents, persons in needs of supervision. Over 7,000 cases in family court in my career, including divorces. The main and only goal of any family court issue really is to ensure that it's in the best interest of children is the right outcome. And regardless of who I represent, I encourage that outcome and support that outcome.
Mr. Alexander.
Representing both parents and children for the past 20 years in custody, visitation, neglect, paternity, support, persons in need of supervision, juvenile delinquency. I've been a matrimonial attorney. I gave that up a few years ago because I discovered there's no such thing as an uncontested divorce. In New York State, parents have an absolute right to be raising their children. Children have a corresponding right to be raised by both of their parents, unless something is completely out of kilter. I've represented children, I've represented parents, I've had the heartbreak of representing several people who've had to go through a termination of parental rights proceeding. It's something you don't forget, and it's something that remains with you forever.
Thank you. The next question relates to the volume of experience. There are a couple of questions on the number of cases individuals have managed locally and whether they present conflicts of interest, also how that experience enables you to better perform or not. So I'd like you each to talk about the caseloads you've handled and shed some light on how that can help us distinguish the two of you. So Mr. Alexander.
I'm not going to profess that I've handled 20 or 30 or 40,000 cases in family court. My caseload probably runs in the thousands. And again, it's been one case at a time. I haven't been supervising anybody else. I do all my own typing. I've had a felony trial back in '99. I've had several felony court appearances since then. My focus has been representing young children, and some of those young children have very serious felony charges pending. They are in family court. But I think my experience, I'll match my time in court, I'll match my experience with anybody.
Mr. Dayton.
Can you repeat that? I just...
So the question was to talk about the caseloads you handled in your career and how that qualifies you, and also whether it presents conflicts of interest.
So, having represented so many cases, this is my approach. I now, as a perspective of public defender, a unique perspective. I have the bad guy sitting across from me in the jail, in my office, and I ask him, why are you doing that? Why did you do this? How are we going to get things right? And they answer, and then we try them. And over the course of 24 years, I've seen different methods tried. I've seen people come out of prison, go back in prison. And then I'm representing them on the parole. Why did you do that? How come that happened? So my vast amount of experience is so unique that I get right from the people, you know, why they commit crimes, to know how to address them and how to sentence them to try to make it so they don't do that again in the future, right? That's the unique set of experience I have. I see that there would be no conflicts of interest on any caseload. Judge Ames transitioned from public defender to judge just like I would be doing. Thank you.
We're going to shift topics to the major drug problem in Cortland County. There are some specific questions. What is your position in regards to mandatory rehab following a 3-day detox? And why does it take so long to get people into rehab? I think I'll start with just those two components. Mr. Dayton.
Right, so my experience in dealing with this drug court issue is vast. Again, I studied and trained and was certified as an original drug treatment court team provider. I have seen hundreds and thousands of cases through that drug court program. So that program is designed to get people that are really interested in addressing their drug problem into the rehab as soon as possible. There can be improvements, but it is a pretty good program out there. In addition, I have personally visited rehabs. I've gone to the prison rehab programs. I invested my time in understanding this problem. I read studies, I talk to people, I talk to those under substance abuse and dealing with that. So from my perspective, that experience is essential to being a good county judge.
Mr. Alexander.
Providing opportunities for those folks who have been charged with crimes, who have severe mental health issues, who have that combined with drug abuse issues as well. You know, every case, again, is going to have to be treated individually. You can't help those folks who simply are unable to help themselves. We do have programs for rehab. I can't speak as to any mandatory requirements to do anything because I can't make any pledges that are going to prohibit me from looking at every possible avenue in the future. But again, dealing with individuals is tough, folks. Dealing with individuals is a case-by-case basis. And when they appear before you with their attorneys, with the recommendations of the people who can help them, we try to offer that each and every time to those folks. And it's really up to them, with the assistance we can give them, to help themselves.
The last part of that question, what is your position in regards to Cortland opening up their own rehab in treatment center? Mr. Alexander.
I would encourage the legislature to take every avenue they can to look at the alternatives to spending money. I'd love to see a rehab treatment if it worked. I'd love to see the educational programs, the rehabilitation programs in our current county jail, if it worked. We try a new thing every few years, and you know, unfortunately, if they work, we keep them around. If they don't work, we have to invent something brand new. We see that in education. We see that in the criminal justice system. If it's up to the legislature, if they have the wisdom to be able to put something in place by studying other communities and the jobs that they've been able to, facilities they've been able to put together, all power to them. Again, I'm just going to work with everybody individually and try to help them help themselves.
Mr. Dayton.
Thank you. Yes, I certainly support an effort of our legislature to devote resources to a local drug and alcohol rehab center or a detox center. It certainly would benefit our community because as it stands now, we often see, because I look at the jail list every day, we often see that people are sitting in jail really waiting for a bed to open. I mean, that's not the purpose of a jail. I understand that judges will often claim that they're doing that, because they have no alternatives, but the purpose of jail is for community safety, and anything that we can do to, expedite and get to that position sooner, I'm in support of.
Thank you. So I'd like you both to help me with something I have some confusion on. I listened to comments about various things you support. Please explain what power the county judge has. What can a county judge do? If you support a program, does that mean the county judge can initiate that program or fund that program or staff that program? So when you talk about these solutions and various programs that we want to see in our county, please discuss what lies within, what are the powers of the county judge, and what you would be capable of doing regarding whether it's drug treatment programs or other initiatives. This really relates to the office of the judge and what the judge is able to do. Starting with Mr. Alexander.
Well, duties of a county court judge in the midst of sanctioning someone is to hold people's feet to the fire. The judiciary is a separate and independent branch of our government. The judiciary is unable to provide funding for the initiatives of the legislature. We're there to interpret the laws. We're there to deal on a case-by-case basis with people who have run afoul of the law. The power of a county court judge is to secure the resources that are available, made available by either grants or funded by the legislature, without the pocketbook, to be able to fund many of the initiatives that we'd like to see happen. We are unfortunately only powerful enough to enforce the laws according to the Constitution and the laws and the resources that we have available to us. And again, it boils down to working with people on an individual basis.
Mr. Dayton.
Thank you. It's an excellent question, and it's a question that I've been going around talking endlessly about. I believe that Cortland County should realize that while we focus on hiring people or electing people in our legislature, the issues and problems that Cortland faces are greatly impacted by the county judge. The county judge is the leader of the criminal justice and family court and surrogate system. What they do sets the tone for the entire system. It's an important job, position that we need to elect someone with experience to be able to handle it, right? A county court judge can put people through judicial diversion. A meth court can have a full range of sentencing options that can address our needs and problems. A county court judge can review the bail set by lower court judges in the event that it's an excessive bail and someone sitting in there. A county court judge can review that. A county court judge can process things, get from 1 year down to 6 months of processing of cases.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next question, beginning with Mr. Dayton. What is your stance on the Fifth Amendment?
Well, the Fifth Amendment is great. It's a constitutional amendment in our Bill of Rights. I strongly support and uphold the Constitution. The Fifth Amendment has many aspects to it. You know, the right to be tried or indicted by a grand jury, the right against self-incrimination, the right not to be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. All of these things are part of our Fifth Amendment that I strongly uphold, like all constitutional amendments. And I'll point out that, in case I don't have another constitutional question coming in, that is a passion of mine. I teach it. I travel around New York State over 100 times, from middle schools to law schools, teaching about our Bill of Rights and our civil rights, 4th, 5th, 6th, 2nd, 8th Amendments. And I've lived it. I lived it with cases and trials and appeals. And so I vigorously support every aspect of the Fifth Amendment.
Mr. Alexander.
Well, we deal with it every day with the criminal procedure law and the penal law. How do I feel about it? It's It's in the Constitution, Bill of Rights. That's it.
Next set of questions relates to parole. One is specific to the city, so I'm not sure how relevant that is.
Hold that one for the end of the evaluation.
I guess discuss the number of people on parole and discuss mental health, whether there are mental health services available to people who might be on parole or incarcerated. Also, there's a question about if there's a county psychiatrist, so maybe in determining parole, discuss mental health issues and the role of the psychiatrist and your approach. So we're starting with Mr. Alexander.
Folks, it's all theoretical to me as a Cortlandville Town Justice. I do know that we have parole violators coming into court on various other infractions, and I believe that I'm stepping on toes if I am to comment on the role of parole and the county psychiatrist. I'm afraid I'm not going to give you a very good answer to that question, so I'll turn it over to Mr. Dayton.
Mr. Dayton.
Well, with respect to parole, one of my job duties is that I represent those that have violated parole. Doing that gives me particular insight, right? Because we represent those individuals, they go through the system, they are sentenced to state prison, they come out of state prison, and sometimes they get their lives on track, and it's great when they come up to me and say, hey, you know, guess what, here's my family, here's my job, and I feel reassured. Unfortunately, there are too many of those that go through the parole system and they end up back re-violating on their parole, in which then my office represents them. And the insight I can get from those that violate their parole status is that I can say, what happened? What didn't work? Could a different sentences have helped? Could a different set of conditions on parole have helped? You know, and so that's that insight that I get from parole that will help me be a county judge in the first instance. Thank you.
The next question relates to your management approach. The questioner cites a case-by-case approach as well as a leadership and advocacy approach. Would you each please discuss what your approach is, starting with Mr. Dayton?
Right, so my case management system is 100% on a case-by-case basis. I bring the vast amount of knowledge and experience, ideas that I have acquired over my long legal career to bear, but it's still a case-by-case basis. And the most important thing that I think that a county judge can do, and there have been some great county judges that I've learned this from, they take a very personal approach. They will look a defendant in the eye and say, hey, I'm about to sentence you to, state prison for 8 years. But then the judge also turns around and says, but you know what? I talked to, your art teacher, and that art teacher says that you are a very talented individual. And so afterwards, as a defense attorney, I go up to the judge and say, well, what's up with that? And he'll say, well, here's the thing. You're going to send them to state prison, but they're going to come back. Treat them as a person, right? Give them hope. Maybe that will be something that they'll latch on to improve their lives. That's the approach I take.
Mr. Alexander.
Thank you again. Just as Mr. Dayton has indicated, a case-by-case approach to every single case is paramount to seeking out justice in any particular instance. People are individuals. They have different problems. Good people do bad things. Bad people do bad things. Bad people do good things. There's humanity in everybody. It's important to listen. It's important to listen. And listen to everybody involved. I guess that's all I have to say on that.
Thank you. The next question relates to term. There's slightly different questions for each of the candidates. With Mr. Dayton, the questions, couple iterations relate to whether there would be conflicts that would require him to recuse himself. For Mr. Alexander, questions relate to the 10-year term and whether age restrictions would preclude him from serving out the whole term. So, different questions here, and I'm happy to repeat, and this time we'll start with Mr. Alexander.
I don't believe it's an issue. I'm quite plainly 62 years old. I've never made any secret of that fact. I'm proud to be 62 years old. I'm proud of my background, and I'm proud that I'm a candidate for Cortland County Judge. Folks, based on my experience in the court system and in my legal system, I will be serving a full term of 8 years. I'll have to retire when I'm 70. You'll have to ask Judge Ames if this is a limitation. His second 10-year term actually ends after 9 years because he turns 70 this year. I hesitate to do it, but folks, you've got me for the first 8 years. Based on Mr. Dayton's claim that he's handled over 20,000 cases, he's absolutely precluded from being our county court judge for the first 3 years. And so you've got me for the first 8, you've got Mr. Dayton for the last 7, and it's your choice.
Mr. Dayton.
Right. I don't know where my opponent talks about I can't represent anyone in county court for the first 3 years. I can fully represent people in county court for the entirety of a term. In fact, I could serve a second term and part of a third term. 22 years I have available. On the ballot that you're going to mark, it says very clearly, county judge, 10-year term. So it surprises me, and I wouldn't do it, that if I am trying to serve my qualifications and get hired for a job, and the job's a 10-year term, that I'm going to even apply for it if I can't serve that full term. It's a shame. As far as conflicts of interest go, there may be a few conflicts of interest that I currently represent now in county court, but that's nothing that isn't ordinarily done. Judge Ames was chief public defender. He transitioned to the county court judge. We've had chief public defenders transition into DA's races. No issues with conflict of interest. Thank you.
We have a town and gown question. Please discuss your perspective on the relationship between our community drug and alcohol problems and the drug and alcohol problems within the SUNY Cortland student population. And as you answer, please do it from the hat of what would a county judge be doing about this? How do these differences or these interrelationships affect how the county judge decides or acts in office? Mr. Dayton.
Well, I guess I am not prepared to make a distinction between the drug and alcohol problem that the SUNY Cortland students face versus our community. To me, it's one problem, and I just haven't seen it. I just don't know of a difference that exists there. It's one problem. But I can tell you that as an instructor for New York State's drinking and driving program for 6 years, I did see students and I did see members of our community in there. And the number one goal is to try to get people on the right track so that they don't repeat and do it again and get them the help they need. So without a distinction, I would approach it similarly.
Mr. Alexander.
I'd have to say that it's a theoretical question on a theoretical issue. Yeah, there are real issues out there, but I really can't weigh in on anything other than the people who come before me. And it's on a one-on-one basis. People that break the law, people that come before me, we have to determine how we can help them. If there is an issue or if there is a pattern, we tend to notice that. But as far as giving you an overall opinion on what the problem is out there, it's simply something that I cannot or will not do.
We now move into the closing statements, 2 minutes each, and we will start with Mr. Alexander.
Thank you. Well, as many of you know, I was a dairy farmer until I was almost 40. In addition to real-world experiences, I attempt to get you to vote for me for county court judge. I will offer this real-world experience, my service for 20 years as an attorney for children, an attorney for the Area Agency on Aging for 16 years, and as Cortlandville Town Justice for the last 4. I've counseled, represented, addressed the needs, again, of the youngest and the oldest and the most vulnerable members of our community. My present areas of practice and jurisdiction correspond precisely with the areas of law and duties required by the county court judge. Now, if you allow me just a moment of personal pride, I went through a several months long process of applying for and being evaluated and judged by the Independent Judicial Elections Qualification Committee. It involved an 11-page questionnaire. It involved me sending in 115 pages of my legal decisions, writings. It involved me going to Binghamton and sitting in a panel of a room. It's kind of a room like this with everybody's eyes on me as they peppered me with questions about my ethical background, my legal background, my financial background. These folks were very thorough. And I'm humbled to be able to say that I'm the only judicial candidate in a 10-county region who was issued, you get 3 ratings, not qualified, qualified. Folks, I'm proud to say that I was the only judicial candidate that was issued highly qualified rating to be elected to Cortland County Judge.
Mr. Dayton.
Thank you. It's my family, it's my future, it's your future, it's your children's future that drive me to run for county judge this year. I bring a particular set of skills to bear to help lead us in the right direction. County court judge is a real and important position. We're at a critical juncture, right? We need someone with the experience and the leadership skills that will do the right thing. I understand that my opponent says he's received the highest qualified rating, but on the other hand, these are people in Albany that are deciding it. Well, you are the voters. 0 cases in county court in 17 years. 0 trials. 0 appeals. Not even qualified to be assigned a serious felony case. He would not be able to be assigned an attempted burglary case in our system, but he wants to be our leader. Now, I'm getting worked up about this, and I don't mean to put him down, and he has every right to do that. But don't run for county judge. Stick to what you're doing. Now, I don't want you to vote for me because you're my family, my student, my client, things like that. Vote for me because we need someone qualified to make the tough decisions and to lead us in the right direction, right? Vote for me for county judge, and I won't let you down. Thank you.
Thank you both. let's give both candidates a hand.